Ta-da.
Sleeves are rolled up. Let's dig deep.
If I'm not sure whether it comes through on the last session, but if you've seen any of the conversations that we've done before with Ros Young, where it's just fits of giggles at the beginning of every session, she did exactly the same earlier on, and I was corpsing like nobody's business. It was just like, will you stop? I just had blocked the camera view of Ros because I just couldn't get started. It was shocking. She just she just creates that laughter all the time. So, okay, we are recording. We are on. So, CPD frameworks. How can we get the best out of them? Okay, so I got to do the whole good morning, good afternoon. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, as you're able to join us for this session of panel conversations. It's going to be a really small panel this afternoon because I am joined by the CEO of Cube and an amazing counsellor in her own right. But Tammi is, there she is. Tammi is someone who not only has set up with partners, the Cube, but she's also driving forward what community engagement should look like into the future. And I am so delighted that she's able to join us. Tammi, thank you for being here. And just give people a little bit more information about Cube and what it is that you do.
Okay, good morning, good afternoon, and good night to everybody that may be listening to us today. So I'm Tammi Owen. As Dave very kindly introduced who we are, so Cube is a not-for-profit organisation based here in South Wales in the UK. And we're unique where we have come together people with lived-in experience. So there's 28 of us. Either experience of delivering services or actually experienced of those services, whether they're positive or negative, because I think the richness of bringing people together that've had poor service often helps more organisations grow rather than bringing together people who've had good service. So the individuals that we support and serve are people who've been affected and living with mental health, domestic abuse and substance misuse. And we're a not-for-profit organisation that aims to be a community for the community.
I think it's really powerful to highlight the shared experience of everyone that's brought the Cube together. And like you say, sometimes having positive and negative experience about service delivery is something that really does shape the effectiveness moving forward, doesn't it?
I think where it identifies us to any other organisation is that I may be the chief exec, but I'm not the boss. They are, and it really is individuals coming together to make a decision to see what we deliver. So because we're lottery funded, we took a long time to really get to understand our communities, because I think that's really important. So we didn't come into an area and said we want to set up this service. We actually brought the community along with us, which, you know, can have its difficulties because every person has a vote. So what is also very unique is we're supported by cooperative principles. So what that means is every single person has a vote. So if you've got 28 people voting, it could be a bit like everybody, you know, 25,000 hours of voting. Who needs to change the light bulb when someone says, oh, well, I changed it last week. So it can have an ongoing effect. But what that does for us in terms of Cube, having those positives and negatives experiences, it keeps us current, but it also keeps us really driving what is best suited and needed for the people that we're trying to support.
Yeah. And I think one of the things that really struck APA when we looked at Cube was, as you say, you may be CEO, but you're not the boss. You're very much at the heart of the organization, not the driving head that most organizations try to make their CEO. And that was something that really kind of struck with APA. It was one of the component parts of Cube being a recipient of one of the EMP awards last year. And it is kind of prudent to point that fact out, because I think a lot of community groups don't see that they have an ethical or a professional approach that can be recognized for just what an organization delivers. And I think Cube have done that exceptionally well.
Yeah, I think what we thought it was very important, and it was very important to me as well, is I guess, there's going to be Susan Boyle singing "I Had a Dream," but it generally was. So I made a decision about 5 years ago that there were certain things I wanted to put in place by the time I retired. And I reached a very significant birthday last year, and I thought, do I have left to give to set something up? And during the 80s, I was a mental health social worker. And during the 80s, about the Care in the Community Acts came about. It was all about encouraging and supporting people to have better awareness about their prescriptions, their mental health, about what they want to do, and how they're informed in their recovery. Now, there are many different ways we can say whoever's at fault for that not to happen, but it didn't go as planned as we all thought it would be. And I guess there's many people who are listening to this will go, oh yeah, I understand, because we were almost told that we were almost lefty liberal social workers because we wanted to give the power back to the person that had the problem. And that's really struck with me with everything that I've done. I've always put two things. One is the person is the expert in their own lives. Mm-hmm. And I'll repeat that because I think that's really powerful, is the person is the expert in their own lives. Mm-hmm. And we should put people in the heart of what we do. And if you can do that, then and you don't drift in what you do, I think that is a really powerful message that stands you for any other organizations. And I think there are a lot of organizations that do what I do, but they don't necessarily believe that it's powerful.
Yeah.
So I think it's actually, you don't have to have CEOs of industry. You don't have to have 1,000,001 different mission statements. I've met many people who I've written or spoken to about vision statements and value bases, and a lot of them will say, "Okay, so what are your values?" "Oh, we've got them on a document somewhere where we pull out every now and again, and we go, oh, okay, but that's helpful. That's a really great place to start. But were they by design, or were they by default?"
Yeah.
And they look at me, "What do you mean by design or by default?" I said, did you just arrive with these values? Or did you include everybody in it to say, this is how we're going to work together and this is what we value as an organization?
Yeah.
And I guess that's where Cube stands apart, because that's what we constantly do. It's keeping our value base strong.
And the values are lived, and the business plan is not a doorstop. No. It's something that is being used day in and day out, and it's growing with every interaction since its formation, and it's adapting and it's growing to what the need is within the community. And that again was something that struck APA with Cube. One of the things that I think really does kind of stand out is that the framework that you've built is something that a lot of organizations can learn from and grow from. And in this conversation, I really want to kind of focus on the CPD frameworks and how we can get the best out of that career development that it really should be ongoing professional development in my mind. In my mind, we have to kind of get to a point where there is an acceptance that we are continually learning. It's not a case of we learned something 20 years ago and that's enough now. You know, Leonardo da Vinci is famously quoted on his deathbed as saying, "I'm still learning." Not in English, obviously. I mean, the guy was Italian, but I'm not. So, but when we accept the continual growth, and I think this is something that Cube has really kind of embraced, we're able to grow in a way that's very different without that CPD or the ongoing development. For you as a professional, as you mentioned previously, a mental health social worker, that should not go unrecognized, and that's, you know, especially at the time in which you were practicing that. And it's an exceptionally tough arena at what was probably one of the toughest of times. And for everyone that was in that situation, I applaud. I thank you for the work that gets done. But that experience also informs your framework for ongoing learning.
It shaped who I am today, really, because of so from a personal point of view, I think sometimes in our previous conversations we talked about we don't fall into our professions. We don't wake up one day and say, "Oh, do you know something? I feel as if I'm going to be a psychotherapist today," or, "Do you know something? I'm going to spend 8 years at university, many hours at client bases, and eventually, you know, I might stumble on a career." I think a very good tutor of mine said that it doesn't really matter, and this is going to sound very strange talking about CPD, but you'll get it when you hear the end of this anecdote, is that he said it doesn't really matter how many books you read, how many courses you go on, unless you can interpret that information, learn from it, and gift it back to the people you work with. And I think that's the beauty of CPD. That's the beauty of any learning. I think it's that you have to open up and do it, but it doesn't have to be in that situation where it has to be a drag. And one of the things that as the chief exec of Cube is that we took a decision that our encouragement of CPD within our organisation is that there's a pot of money. We're a not-for-profit organisation, so we're not a limited company. We don't have, I guess, like most third sector organisations, don't have a lot of money. But what I wanted to make sure is that every single person, regardless of what you do for Cube, have access to CPD. So there's many people within Cube that offer and deliver training. So every single person, whether or not you are a volunteer, a mentor, a board member, a member of staff, every single person has and takes part in that training. And there's a pot of money within our reserves to allow people to access outside CPD. But we've kind of done it two ways. So there's an encouragement for people to take CPD from a professional point of view for learning, but also a CPD for fun. Because I think sometimes that if you're encouraged to look at fun, a fun aspect of CPD, whether or not it's, you know, going on a life drawing course or a 2-hour session of reflexology or something, I think it's important that if you can, as an organisation, that everyone has access to the same, because otherwise it has a disparity, because not everybody can afford it.
It's those frameworks that allow those things to fall into place. And when you have that mindset that CPD is a component factor, it has to be in place. That it's almost like a limb on a tree that wouldn't be there unless you wanted it to be there. And you end up with a scenario where everyone that you're engaged with understands and appreciates the value of CPD, whether it is for the professional task related learning or whether it is for that general in life enhancement. It has a value. It's like two sides of the same coin. And I'm forever speaking to clients who say, oh, there's two sides to every coin. It's like, no, there's not. There's three. And the value is not on the head or the tail. It's somewhere in the middle. And you have to understand that it's that third side of the coin that holds the value inside. And it's just like CPD, whether it's CPD on a professional learning, whether it's the CPD for the personal learning, the value is inside for that individual. And connecting to that value is some of the hardest things, because most of us have been tarnished by our educational experience before we even got into the workplace. Do you find that the CPD framework that you've adopted within CUBE is challenged by people's perception of learning because of their experience of mainstream education predominantly?
Yeah, very, very much so. I think some of the barriers to learning may be, as you mentioned, about previous learning as well, but also confidence, around confidence, whether or not, because somebody else has paid for it, they've got to finish it, or I can't do that because I wasn't very good at school. So a lot of people may feel a bit apprehensive. One of the examples I'll give you is that we're forming a directorship with our board members, and quite a lot of people have said, oh no, I can't become a director because that means I've got to learn how to be a director. And I said, well, you can learn that by doing, by mentoring, by shadowing. It's not about taking an exam, it's about learning by experience. And I think in this country, we don't honour experiences so much. It tends to be classically, you're academically bright, and I think we don't take in emotional intelligence. We don't take into account logic. We don't take into account, how we look at solutions. So I've met many academically bright people that wouldn't know how to turn on a plug, and I've met many people who haven't had any academia that emotionally intelligent and could run rings around me academically. So I think it's what we see value in it, and I think we're getting back to that point about values. It's what you feel you hold your value to that you find valuable. And for me, growing up as a child, so most people may not know this, some people may know this, but so my mum was a single parent, and she had, so back in the day in the early 60s, there was no such thing as income support or any additional stuff. So my mum had 3 jobs to bring me and my sister up. And we were brought up council house estates, quite impoverished and poor area. I mean, I went to a secondary modern school, and I would be in the classroom with very, very wealthy people, and I would be the one student almost from the worst part of town that came to school. But what always the driving force for me was, my mum always said about the power of education. we read as children. My mum, even very, I've got vague memory. I mean, I'm in my 50s, so I've got vague memories of my mother. No matter how tired she always read to me, and reading was always an escape for me. So even now, if I, I've embraced the Kindle, the old-fashioned to turn the pages of books. So I've always known the value of education, and I instilled that in my daughter, but in a different way. She wanted to go to university. She went to university, but I encouraged her to embrace whatever she wanted to do. So rather than pick a topic, I knew that she would excel and get a job out of it. I said, what do you want to learn? What is it that you would really love to do? So she did media and communications and thoroughly enjoyed it. But she would say it's her experiences that she's had growing up has enabled her to do the job that she does. Her degree that she has is as well as the next qualification you're going to have. Now, I'm not saying that qualifications aren't worthwhile, because people strive and take a lot of time to be able to do that. But I think sometimes we talk about CPD, I think it should be about experimental learning as well. I don't think it should be just what you write down on a piece of paper. I think it could be talked through. It could be conversations like we have here today. There could be your personal reflection, where you can reflect to another person about it. Because I think sometimes when you write things down with someone, you might lose that richness of what you're trying to explain. So I think CPD could be anything, but I think it's about you viewing something differently and learning something, and it doesn't necessarily have to be anything that's academic, but it has to be something that will challenge you and allow you to grow.
Yeah, and I think, within APA, the whole approach to CPD is the individual validates what they've learned before they gain the CPD. And by giving somebody the experience, sharing the knowledge, and then saying, you validate that, you tell us what you've learned, you tell us how that is going to impact on your growth and how you can use that to support those around you. And then we start to see that there is that value attached to the learning itself. And I think within the organization, I think there's currently, from what we've produced ourselves, probably around about 40 hours worth of CPD available. But what we're not, it's not a case of watch this, get CPD. It's a case of, if you watch this and you get the value that you can validate, then you get CPD. And that's the kind of framework that I think has been lost by the drive to academic bias. And it strikes me as almost a misnomer that the therapeutic community has gone down the same road as all other sectors when it comes to academic bias, because we know that the relationship and the interaction is what is the key factor, not the piece of paper and the certificate on the wall. And if, as a sector, we can drive that reconnection to interaction, to self-awareness, to the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, then our clients, whether they are therapeutic clients, whether they are placement clients, whether they are coaching clients, we're able to get better outcomes because the value is seen in the right place rather than on a piece of paper on a wall.
Yeah,
It's not saying It's not saying that the certificate isn't important to be on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
It's about letting that be your baseline. That's the driving license that says, okay, now you can go out and start to learn how to drive. You know, when we look at the most successful organizations, they all embrace the experience of their teams. When we look at most mediocre, maybe not the right word, but the majority of organizations, when somebody comes along and says, oh, but where I was before, we did it like this. And those companies go, yeah, we don't do it that way. So keep your we did it that way to yourself. We're not interested. Yet the most successful go, you did what? Tell us about it. How can we fit that in? How can we use that? How can we grow from that? And the therapeutic community has almost lost sight of the very learning principles that we're using with our clients and not using the same with ourselves as a learning sector.
So what struck me, linking in what you were just saying now, is something that I will often say in my therapeutic practice. So I, as many people may know, I deliver training as well. So one of the training that I deliver is on vicarious trauma, and it's talking around professionals and what they can do around self-care. But I always ask the aims of the course, and at the end of it, I'll always say, so how many of us have got a driving license? A lot of people will put them up and say, how many have got any degrees and other bits and pieces? I said, oh, great. So how many of you have been on a course for 7 hours and got a lovely certificate for it, or a nice little handbook from it, never used it, never done anything about it? And a lot of people will giggle and kind of go, yeah, me too. I said that, many times I've come out of a training experience and thought, that's 3 hours I'm never going to get back of my time. But what I'll always start off by saying is, I want you to challenge me in anything that you think is controversial. I want you to challenge me about something you don't understand. But most importantly, I want you to think about the so what question. Look at me and say, what do you mean, so what? So what are you going to do about it? So you've spent 7 hours on a training course, or 3 hours, or 2 days, or whatever you've experienced. It's the same with the therapeutic relationship. So how are you going to take all this learning, and what are you going to do about it afterwards? Because otherwise it might as well be another training course or another certificate that you're never going to use. And everyone kind of goes, oh yeah, I can see that. So if anybody's listening to this as well and thinking about their own practices, is when you're experiencing, ask yourself the so what question. So what does listening to this experience today, how is that going to inform how you embrace CPD? How are you going to think about, how are you going to challenge and encourage other people to experience CPD? Does it have to be professional? Could it be personal? But can we make those changes? So one of my favorite quotes is around the definition of madness, and we all use it in different frameworks, but we do that anyway, don't we? Einstein says definition of madness is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome. What he also said is that it's about that change, is that if we keep thinking that nothing is going to change, we're not going to make those changes. So how will we as a community, because a therapeutic community, wherever you belong, we are another community. How are we going to drive our communities now to think differently about CPD and about encouraging it? And how are we going to support every person within whatever organisation you are to feel that they can access it alongside everybody else? Don't make it elitist. Most organisations do. There are elitists of what kind of qualifications a CPD you can go for. I believe, and I think it's really powerful, is that you encourage every single member of your team to go with whatever they feel that they need to do. And I think that's really important. So I encourage every single person that's listening to this is to ask themselves that question, so what?
Yeah. Um, I think there's a flip side to Einstein's theory of madness.
Mm.
We can talk about making changes till the cows come home.
Mm.
But if the outcome remains the same, whatever we've done before, then we haven't made a difference. And if we haven't made a difference, what was the point?
Mm.
And I think the therapeutic community and the social care community and the justice community and the military community are very good at reframing a situation, but not changing the picture.
Mm.
And we put frames around it and we talk about, oh, we're going to switch to this and we're going to do that, but the outcome stays the same, because ultimately we don't like the idea of change into something that we don't know the change is going to be.
Mm.
Yet when we're working with clients, we are supporting them through that journey into that change and into that difference and into that growth. And as a sector, it's all very well quoting Einstein. You quote him till the air doesn't come out anymore. But if the outcome is the same tomorrow as it was yesterday, then we wasted today.
Yeah, I agree.
And for me, CPD is something that when we look at what is the growth that we want to see for ourselves, and what are the stepping stones that of CPD that will get us that growth. So for me, as an example, when I'm looking at coaching practice, I want to be as flexible and as responsive to what comes in and what a client needs. For me, that means my knowledge base has to be as wide and as deep as possible. And I have to have the kit for me to be able to delve into that knowledge pool as and when I need it, but know that it's there to go and get. And that means I'm looking at what are the challenges that are being faced by those potential clients. But that means I've got to research my potential client. It means I've got to know where that client is generally and what they are facing. So I can make sure that I'm ready for when they go, okay, now I'm ready, I need some support. And I've got the kit ready and waiting for them. But that takes time, it takes planning, it takes research, and it takes an awareness that I don't have all the answers right now, because I'm not my client.
No.
I can only do what I can do. And
So,
God, sorry.
No, I was going to say, so whilst you were talking, what struck me was back in the day, so back during the early 80s and the early 90s, for many people from my generation will kind of laugh at this, but for people who are looking at it now, will kind of, will go, well, why didn't you think this and everything else? So when I first trained as a social worker, we were taught with Maslow's hierarchy of needs, because I think it's always a very good point. And when we were talking about self-actualization, we were saying that, that's what we're all driving for as individuals and humans. And they were saying that unless you reached certain points in Maslow's hierarchy of needs of safety and love and connection and everything else, that you will never have your needs met. And what's interesting is that the more research is going on and everything else that has shifted and changes. So in 2000, and I think in 2000, I think there was a recognition is that you can have your needs met good enough. Is that regardless of where you're at in terms of, as long as you feel safe, warm, and connected, then you can thrive and survive. And I think what you're talking about there about self-actualization is, as humans and individuals, I think, and this is just a theoretical question, I think we're all striving to achieve something, whatever that may be, whether or not it's the new shoes, whether or not it's a new job, a partner. There is something innately in us that drives us to be different, to try something different, to belong. We are all striving, and I think that striving is a bit like what we do about learning, is that, you know, we're all striving to learn something new, to adapt to everything else.
Yeah.
And I'm still passionate about therapy now as I was when I learned. I'm always learning. I'm saying learn because I didn't, you know. So I qualified in, I won't say where I qualified, but many years ago I did qualify. But I still get excited. So when I read and research a new therapy, or if I love the fact that TA always comes around every 10 years and people discover it again and go, how wonderful it is, all about connections, relationships. And I'm going, yeah.
Yeah,
So, you know,
I was there with the first rerun.
yeah, I saw the same book, yeah. But it's too, you know, every time I read something, and I think that's something I think is another valid point really, is that I'll go back to, is CPD doesn't necessarily have to be about a course. It doesn't necessarily have to be anything. It could be even revisiting your old books that you had, or revisiting your old membership books that you had. You know, it's having conversations with other therapists and going, oh, you know, what do you think, and how do you think that, and how do you approach that?
And it's the
It doesn't,
value of that, isn't it?
yeah, I think so.
The value, interpretation, and regurgitation.
Listen.
And that for me is what learning should always have been about. But as we said before, there is a component factor that distorts our perception of learning because of the education system that we had prior to that. And I'm a firm advocate, along with there's a guy from the World Economic Forum who famously said our education system is not fit for purpose, who basically pointed out that we've grown an education system out of the Victorian need for people to work in factories. And the Industrial Revolution collapsed when people realized that they'd learned enough to build the machines to do themselves out of work. And we ended up with the Luddite Revolution, where people took the hammers to the machines so they could go back to work. And we're now in a situation where our education system has taught people the same for a digital age.
Well, what struck me is really, what highlights this point really well is something that I became aware of about 5 years ago, is I didn't realise that medical students, 80% of the things that they learn, and I'll say this again, 80% of the things that they learn, they will never, ever have to know about. They have to teach them absolutely everything just in case, but they're 80%, so only 20% of their taught university time is what they will have value in. They don't learn any more bedside manner. They don't know how to communicate with patients. They don't talk about mental health difficulties within the profession. They don't look at relationships, how to communicate, how to make connections, how to build rapport.
Yeah. And all of these things that the therapeutic community know, and even the Dalai Lama has been talking about probably for centuries. But the idea that if we connect to our emotional intelligence, we will change the way we interact with our psychological intelligence as well as our physical intelligence. And it's one of the reasons why APA's framework on positive mental health includes education, but it also includes that focus on emotional awareness. If we can take everything that we know about psychological interactions, the difference between reactions and responses, we get to the point of understanding our own risk assessments, our own safety constructs, we're able to engage with the world around us in a way that allows our emotional well-being to lead how we think and then how we act. We've spent so long, it strikes me as really confusing. The standing joke about therapy is when you go because you have a psychological challenge, the first question, how do you feel? Not, what do you think? Because therapy is about the 2/3 of the human condition. That is not the physical. It's the emotional and the psychological. But we've become so focused on mental health that we ignore the emotional well-being. But we know if we understand how we feel, it impacts on how we think. And how we think impacts on how we act.
Yeah.
And our CPD, our reaction to learning is led by how we feel about learning.
Yeah. So it's interesting. So I challenge most of my therapists out there to keep a tally in the back of their heads every time they ask their client, and even in a direct or indirect way, how do you feel about that? And often the description you will get is what they're thinking. And if you ask a client, that's an interesting thought, tell me about that, a lot of people will tell you how you feel. Is that lots of people have got to take some time to really think about how they think and how they feel. And it's interesting. So I think it'd be quite interesting to have one of these panels about the something on the lines of things you know now you wish you would have known when you were first as a counsellor. Because I think it'd be
if I knew then what I know now.
No, yeah, exactly. So very old school. So we were always taught to ask the client, what brought you here today?
The bus.
Yeah, so exactly. The bus, the neighbour, the train. Yeah, so it was always, so every time somebody says that, I always think the same. So for me as a therapist, as when I'm practicing, even though I'm a psychotherapist, we've adopted an ethos. It's called a restorative approach, framework of questions that you use. So we will always ask people, so what's been happening? And we'll use a time frame. So what happened then, what's happened now, and what's happened since. What do you think and how do you feel about that? So, and it's getting their story. And then we talk about the effects. So have you been affected? Who's been affected? What are the effects for that? What do you need? Because often a lot of people think they need deeds rather than needs. So, and how are they going to meet that need? Because as we talked about before, as therapists, we can't meet someone's need. It's how can you support someone to go through that journey? But it's that so what question, which we came to. So what are you going to do about it? Or so how are you going to move forward? Or what do you want to put in place to be able to overcome this? So it's that so what question. So we ask it a lot from our clients or patients, whatever you call it. So I'm getting back to that original question. If we're asking this of the people that we're trying to do, we should be asking it more of ourselves.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's where CPD really has its own challenge of the professional, and having frameworks where we plan out what the CPD is that we want and need for ourselves. We can then start focusing on that, how I feel and versus how I think. But because all of these things within the sector. And I don't mean to be disrespectful to professionals in any way, shape or form, but all these things have got jumbled up. It's like the Lego bricks have just been mixed up and nobody knows which color goes where anymore. It's like the breaking apart what somebody needs, what somebody wants, and what their desire is. All of that is all mixed up. So I need this. No, you don't. That's what you want. Or that's a desire. And all of that confusion has led to therapeutic professionals who are still trying to unpick that for themselves and sitting in front of clients. And if the CPD doesn't keep supporting that separation, so the individual professionals can isolate those things, understand them in their entirety, but also contextualize them, what chance does the client have at trying to work those things out for themselves? And it's that sense of there is our own therapeutic journey that has to be included in our professional development. And not just, it doesn't have to be continuous. It can just be, I need something now, and I need that additional journey for myself, and not seeing ourselves as letting someone else in the profession know that we're struggling or we're dealing with something, because they're the very same fears and concerns that our clients have already overcome by coming to see you.
I guess it's about that. So when I first went into training, we were encouraged as part of our personal development to journal write. I don't know if you remember back in the day, where
I got sent chalk and a blackboard.
Did you? Oh, mine came with messages with owls, but for that reason. But we use that often in tools because we found that quite helpful. And sometimes when you're working with clients, especially around self-explanatory or dream work or self-expressions, and we'll say, would they be willing to think about some solutions? And you'll offer, if that's how you work, some of those things around journal writing. If people are starting to think, okay, in terms of CPD, how can I take some time to explore? Because sometimes I'm so busy. Just scribble a few notes down. Just every now and again, scribble a couple of notes down, and then after, in between clients, just sit down and have a look. And okay, so what was the intent? What was the intention? What's the reflection? Think about that, and you'll surprise yourself. You will really surprise about some of those insights. And sometimes as a therapist,
themes emerging, don't you?
Yeah, themes. Yeah.
And you start to see that actually there is a focus going on in here because of what I'm seeing out there that I might need to actually explore a little bit more. And it gives you those starting points. And when you're looking at your CPD plan, you've got a point of focus. You've got a point of reference that you can say, actually, that's something that I do want to explore. It's something that's coming up organically, not because there is a challenge, there is a problem, there is a crisis. And I think when we're looking at CPD frameworks, getting away from the idea that the CPD is a chore because we have to do CPD, but getting to a point where that's my growth. That's where I become a better version of me. And if I'm not prepared to go down that journey, how can I expect a client to walk into the room and go through that journey themselves? Because surely they are in a situation where they've been brave enough to put their head above the trench and say, okay, this is going on and I need this support. But if the professional isn't able to match that for themselves, then there's going to be a dynamic difference between those two individuals, and that relationship will be impacted by it. Like we said before, the therapeutic relationship is the key factor. It's the personality, the self-awareness, the ability to laugh at the right time and engage with the client where they are that makes the difference. And if we're not able to do that because we're not engaging with ourselves and our own growth, the client's going to spot it. The client will see that gap and they will very quickly go, I'm running rings around you in this, and I need to find somebody else. And that fear factor that might be causing that in the professional, that actually, if I do that, then my client's going to see it and they're going to leave. Well, you've just created the situation where you're right, they do see it and they do leave. And you prove yourself right. And that reinforces you not going to get the support, not going to do the CPD, shutting down and going, well, the client just left. Not my fault.
I know we're having a bit of a ponder. So when we're not in lockdown, a lot of us drive. So we've all got cars. So every year, a car has to go in for an MOT. It's legal. If you don't have an MOT for your car, then anything happens, your insurance is null and void. I think, as a profession, I think we should treat our brain going for an MOT. I think every year, I think everybody should go for a service. So you go in. I think it's true. I think you should go and have a service. Go and have an MOT. I think you should pick a therapist out of a book that you've never seen before or don't know. Go and have some clinical supervision. I think we should embrace going for a service, going for an MOT. And I think it would give us so much different richness, because if you think about having a conversation with somebody that you may not know, they don't have any view on you, they don't know anything about you, it may be a dialogue. We expect clients coming to us that don't know anything about it. We expect it from clients, don't we? We expect them to embrace coming in to having a couple of sessions. I think we as therapists should experience that themselves. And I think feeling uncomfortable as a therapist will teach us far more than being complacent. And I think I'm going to spend most of my life feeling uncomfortable.
I think I have to be very careful what I say at this. Do I give anything away about APA's future plans? No.
No. Leave it there.
I think in a lot of respects that CPD action plan may become something that we look at the beginning of a year, and then we revisit at the end. And we look at conversations around what has happened over that year for that individual. And whether that's through supervision, whether that's through other platforms, other means, I think there is scope for us looking at ourselves as professionals and kind of answering the one question: what did I learn this year that makes me better than last year?
Yeah, it's a so what question, Dave.
Yeah, but it sounds better when it's not.
Mine has less words.
We're talking about professionals. They can have.
I know. I know.
But you're right. It is. You've done all this. So what? What difference have you brought to your engagement with those that you work with? And that's the key. Every year it should be a step up. Every year it should be, I have enhanced my service, my delivery because of. And if we're at a point where I haven't changed anything in the last 3 years, then do you know what? It's time to take a break. It's time to reevaluate. Is this where you want to be? Are you providing the best that you can be? Because as soon as you lose the passion, it doesn't matter how much knowledge you have. It doesn't matter how well you communicate. It doesn't matter at one iota at how confident you are about what you knew, the passion is gone. And if the passion's gone, it's a bit like the Rolling Stones regurgitating hits from 1961. Mick Jagger really doesn't want to be doing songs from that long ago when he's still trying to write songs now. He wants to be doing the stuff now. He doesn't want to be doing that stuff. And therapeutic professionals have got to start looking at what are the needs now, not what was in the textbook. The textbook is your baseline. That's your springboard. It's not the wings of your aircraft. You know, that's the that's the fuselage, that's the seats, that's your landing gear. But you need wings to be flying with this. And those wings are your CPD, and the CPD has to be constant.
I agree. And I think that we as a community will be looking at different ways to approach how we work, mainly because of the pandemic. I know that there's not much face-to-face work going on at the moment. It's more either online or through Zoom or through phone calls and things. But I wonder where we're shifting and changing, embracing modern technology. I think it's time for us to think about what else that we need to do. And I think CPD is CPD, supervision, self-care, I think, is something that as an organisation, all organisations, but definitely as a community, we need to revisit whilst we have the time, because we know mental health is on the increase. We know the calls to action we're going to be facing is whatever organisation you work with. We know our workload is going to double, triple, quadruple in the next couple of months. So take stock now in the time that you can to look at your own as well as looking at your staff if in that situation. Yeah. I think it's vitally important.
And throughout the panel conversations this season, we've had those comments, that feedback. Now's the time for the therapeutic community to actually embrace what it is that we need for ourselves because of what is coming. Yeah. And self-care, self-reflection, the CPD, the restrictive recruitment, all of these things that have played a part in keeping the sector where it is are things that we now need to start sharing with the public so they understand this burden's going up. But the illusion, the magic trick that is therapy that you see in what's delivered, you need to know that actually behind the scenes, there is a whole lot of other stuff that has to happen. We can't deliver that magic if these things aren't in place. And we are being driven harder and harder, cut back on the time to process, the time for CPD, the time for supervision. All of those factors are being pushed and pushed and pushed and strained like never before. But if we as a sector let that happen, we will burn out. We will be the ones going, who was there for us when we needed it? Because we can only be there for each other. There is no back line here. We're it. And if we are not able to stand what's coming through the door from the community and support ourselves and hold each other up, then there is going to be nobody behind us to hold us.
Yeah. I also think as well is that perhaps as a final thought to think about before we close this evening, is that do we want to as a community to have control about the things that we do, or is it that we will only make those changes when they're upon us and we are forced to? So do we want to embrace these changes now whilst we're still able to, or are we going to wake up one day and think, oh, I'm going to have to work something differently because that's the only outlook that I've got?
Yeah. And I think it's a powerful powerful kind of thought, really. Do we wait for the inevitable tidal wave, or do we get up onto the top floor before it
That's
hits?
right. Yeah.
And I'll leave that one, because I think we can come back to it, and we can let people kind of get involved in the conversation on that. I think that as we move forwards, the focus of our community has got to be making sure the public know the reality of what therapy is. 6 sessions. If it doesn't work in 6 sessions, it's because 6 sessions wasn't enough. It's not because the therapy didn't work for you, or that you were beyond the help. It's because there is enough in there that needs more than those 6 sessions. Don't beat yourselves up if you are going through that process. But for professionals as well, when you are in a situation where you are only funded for 6 sessions or 8 sessions or 12 sessions, and the client doesn't achieve the outcomes that are desired, not needed, wanted, but desired, don't beat yourself up. It's not because you're not good enough. It's because there's not enough time to cover that in what's been commissioned. We've got to start looking at CPD, learning, supervision, education within the sector, recruitment. We've got to look at all of these things now. And like you say, we're working in different ways now, and we're going to be for a long time. So we've got to work out what is the best for us as individuals, for our individual practices and our client base, but also the wider community. And if we are burned out, there ain't nobody else to step in. We need each other, and we need that CPD to be valuable. Yeah, it's playing. But look, Tammi, thank you so much for your time.
You're welcome.
And I hope you've enjoyed the conversation. I know I have. I hope everyone that's been able to watch this has enjoyed the conversation. If there's value in this for you, if you gain information that is going to enhance your service that you deliver to your clients and those you work with, you can get a CPD certificate for this session. There's a validation CPD quiz on the description of this video and also on the ANA website. So you can download that, get that back to us. Let us know the value you gained and how you can use that information and get that CPD certificate for yourself. For now, I want to say thank you for everybody that's been able to watch. Tammi, thank you. I hope we get to see as many of you as possible on another conversation, either the In Conversation With series, the hidden conversations, or the panel conversations. One thing is clear, APA is driving those conversations. It's in everything that we do. Every client interaction is a conversation. And for everybody out there, please keep talking. For now, take care. Have a good day.